Okay. So 6:33 p.m. Thursday, December 3rd, 2020. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. As a simple matter of business, Ron, can you call the planning board meeting to order?
Yes, I'd like to call to order the joint planning board and Board of Selectmen meeting on the housing production plan. Mr. Coons,
Present.
Ms. Delicio, Ms. Foley,
Present.
Mr. Gilbert,
Present.
Mr. Olney,
Yes, I'm here.
and Mr. Russell.
Ron, this is Christine. I'm present. I just couldn't figure out how to unmute
Okay.
myself on my phone.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And Mr. Russell, with 6 more members present, we have a quorum.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a couple of announcements and a little bit of discussion about how this meeting's going to go, and we'll get right into it. So first of all, well, thanks for coming tonight. I want to make a little mention about, well, COVID in town. So as many of you know, we've had a bit of an uptick this past week in cases, and it's not really unexpected given the way things have been going in the state so far, but it is, unfortunate. It's something we're concerned about. The Board of Health is, when the Department of Health is processing it right now. It's the sort of thing that we would expect with a lot of people coming home from college and Thanksgiving Day celebration. But what we really need to do is we really need to pick up our game now. We're heading into some more holidays, and it's important for us to be really diligent about social distancing and keeping our personal exposures more limited. So we've closed town hall except for by appointment out of an abundance of caution. That's to let we'll make sure that we'll still be able to do all the functions in town hall without anybody getting sick. There's going to be, I believe, a Board of Health meeting tomorrow to discuss some options, and the Board of Selectmen will also be discussing this on Monday. And you can expect to hear more from the town and the boards quite soon as we work through some ways to support people over the next few weeks. So that's COVID. So you'll stand by. You'll hear more from us on this, and we are on top of it. Second, the chat is disabled for this meeting. I disabled it last meeting. A couple of meetings ago, we had some interlopers. Well, one interloper come in and put pornographic comment into the chat. That was completely unacceptable and unworkable. And there are some concerns that we have about how the chat interacts with public meeting law. So we'll do this the old-fashioned way, and we did it this way last meeting. We've done it for decades this way, where people will simply raise their hands and be recognized and speak when they want to ask a question. A small detail, I'm not muting everybody. I'd like people, if they're not speaking in general, to keep themselves muted. That way we'll avoid any background noise and potentially feedback when people are speaking. Now, what this meeting is tonight. So we're killing multiple birds with one stone here. For some months, we've been working on an update of the housing production plan for the town. This is a required thing that we need to update from time to time.
Eli, excuse me. This is Alan. Before you get into the housing production plan, I'd like to just make one brief comment that applies to the whole meeting, if I may.
Yes.
So I am reasonably technically competent, not great, but I found it extraordinarily difficult to put together the various pieces to attend the Zoom meeting. The agenda was in one place, the passcode was in another. I had to get advice from my more technically savvy friend, Ann Harrison, about how to actually get in. Took me about 15 minutes and with her advice. And I think we should make it easier for people to join these Zoom meetings. Putting all the information together in one place, for example, with the link, and the link didn't work, but the link and the passcode so that people can attend and participate without having to go through lots of machinations to do it.
Fair enough. We will see if we can do that better in our subsequent meetings.
Thank you, Eli.
All right, so back to what this meeting is about. So the housing production plan. So the housing production plan, once it's been finalized, or the draft of it is, it needs to be presented to both the planning board and the board of selectmen. And then the planning board and the board of selectmen ultimately have to vote to accept the housing production plan, the updated housing production plan. The housing production plan will actually inform the residents and the boards to some degree regarding the 40B discussion. So we decided to make this public forum that we're having tonight to meld it with the presentation of the housing production plan. It'll give us an opportunity to have the information that will help us in our discussion process around the 40B. And it'll give everybody an opportunity to ask questions about it and 40B in one session. So the first part of the meeting is going to be that presentation of the housing production plan. And at the end of that, planning board members and board of selectmen members will have an opportunity to ask technical questions, details about the housing production plan. I'm going to give the boards the opportunity to do that first. We're not going to debate anything about the housing production plan. We're just going to ask questions about it. If there's discussion about pros and cons of particular aspects of it, or particular options for us, that can take place at separate planning board or board of selectmen meetings if that's appropriate. But right now it's just going to be questions about the presentation. And then after that, we're going to open up a public Q&A session. The public Q&A session is, it's just wide open for the public to ask questions of staff or the board of selectmen regarding the 40B project. The board of selectmen is not going to be spending any time tonight working out details of negotiations with the developer or anything else. It's just a public Q&A session. We'll keep it open as long as we need to let people ask all the questions they want. So that's the layout for the meeting tonight. And I think with that, we will get started. So what
Eli?
Yeah, was that Ann?
Yeah, it's Ann. Just as a point of information, for those of you who are following this on a computer, if you want to raise your hand, in the bottom margin, at least on my computer, you find a thing called participants. And if you click on participants, it brings up a list of the participants. And at the bottom of the list, or at the bottom of the frame, that part of the list, there's a button that says raise hand. And that's how you raise your hand. It's not that you actually raise your hand so that Eli can scan every one of the 118 participants. I've driven somebody away. Raise your hand will let Eli know that you have a question when we get to the point when we're having questions. And that's it.
Okay. And what I'd like is for us to get through the housing production plan presentation. Board members can ask questions later. And the members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions as well, but that's going to be after the two different boards have their opportunity to ask questions. All right, so with that, I would like to turn this part of the meeting over to Karen Sonnenborg and Greg Federspiel for the presentation of the housing production plan.
Thank you. I appreciate having the housing production plan melded with your 40B discussion. This is a great opportunity to speak directly to both members of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. This draft is an update of the housing production plan that we prepared in 2015. When I had an initial discussion with Sue Brown about doing this, I was very much impressed by the progress that had been made in actually implementing key actions in the 2015 plan and the number of irons that you have in the fire for being in a good position to actually produce affordable units in the next few years. I want to speak to specifically establishing the housing trust, putting town plan on a full-time basis, and very importantly, the master planning process that you've recently gone through that was a very big part of informing this updated plan. The housing production plan's pretty detailed. I'm going to try to just touch on the key takeaways from the plan and look forward to questions and comments at the end. And Greg, thanks for helping out here. So a lot of you probably know about affordable housing requirements, but just as a basic starting point, there are a number of definitions of affordable housing. HUD's definition is that if you are spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether it be for rental or ownership, you're living in housing that's not affordable to you. The definition that we usually refer to most commonly is that's attached to Chapter 40B. If a unit meets all these requirements, it can be included in the subsidized housing inventory, what's called the SHI. Those units that are available to help meet that 10% affordability threshold under 40B or housing production goals. So in order for a unit to count, it has to be affordable to those earning at or below 80% of area median income. And that's the whole Boston area, extending even into New Hampshire, going all the way down to South Coastal communities, out to Framingham. These income limits are changed annually, and they're adjusted by household size. Just an example, close to the average household size in Manchester of 3, the limit for 2020 is $86,650,000. The unit also has to be subsidized. If not subsidized directly by a local, state, or federal source, it has to be proved by a subsidizing agency, such as a 40B development. Before the developer can apply for a comprehensive permit to the ZBA, it has to go to one of the state's subsidizing agencies to get the go-ahead. Units have to be deed restricted. The affordability restrictions have to remain in the long term, and we're moving more and more to insisting on in perpetuity to the greatest extent possible. And they have to be affirmatively marketed so people outside the community have an opportunity to learn about the project, affordable units, and can apply. Next. So looking at what's affordable in Manchester. So we're still relying on the 2010 census figure of 2,275 year-round housing units in Manchester. And we're halfway there. 115 units are now defined, included in the SHI. by the state. There's still a gap, obviously, to get to the 10% level. And when the 2020 census figures are released, that year-round housing figure will increase and the percentage will change somewhat. You can see on the chart that Manchester's in the middle of the pack when compared to its neighbors, with a range of Essex being in the lowest range at 2.7%, and Ipswich at 8.6%. Wenham is at 8.4%, but with approval of one of the projects, Maple Woods, it'll be beyond 10%. Just to note that almost all the SHI units are rentals, mostly for seniors. There are 5 condos at part of Summer Street. And most of the units, about 3/4 of the units involve units that are owned and managed by the Manchester Housing Authority. I should mention, just as an aside, the MHA inventory is very important. And just to show the demand for these units, for the 4-family units, the wait list includes 2,217 applicants. And for the senior units, 80 units, there are 800 applicants, to show the demand for these important subsidized units. Next slide. So we are processing the plan through housing production regulations, which are really a subset of Chapter 40B that were meant by the state to offer greater local control to communities on affordable housing development. So the first step is to get the plan approved by the locality, submitted to the state. The plan has to meet a number of requirements, including having production goals based on 0.5% of its year-round housing stock, which is now 11 units in Manchester. If the town can show in a calendar year that it has produced 11 units, it applies to the state for certification, which means that for the next 12 months, the town can deny comprehensive permit applications that it determines are inappropriate, as they do not respond to local housing needs. If the town can produce 1% of year-round housing stock, which would be 23 units in the case of Manchester, it'll get a 2-year certification, which some people refer to as a safe harbor. As I mentioned before, when the 2020 census figures are released, we estimate that the annual housing production goal will increase somewhat, but not more than 12 units per year. Next slide. I also alluded to the fact that the state's pretty prescriptive about what needs to be in the housing production plan beyond an executive summary. A very important component is a very comprehensive housing needs assessment that really looks at demographic, economic, housing characteristics and trends, documents priority housing needs, and really does a thorough analysis of the housing dynamic in the community. It then also acknowledges that creating affordable housing is complicated and takes time and is challenging for communities, and asks for towns to identify the key challenges or barriers for creating affordable housing in the community, and how through the plan or other means the town might go about mitigating some of those obstacles. And we have to include annual housing production goals for each of 5 years, looking at housing strategies in particular, what strategies can be used to meet these goals and address the priority needs that were outlined in the housing needs assessments. And under housing strategies, the plans must include strategies that address 5 categories of strategies, which are listed here, that relate to modifying zoning, looking at potential 40B sites, really identifying preferred characteristics of affordable housing development, must identify municipally owned parcels, which the town is looking to consider for affordable housing, and also look at participation in regional collaborations addressing housing development. Next slide. So there's a lot of information in the plan. Just to give you kind of a little updated information from what you had in the master plan. Certainly a relatively stable population. There's been some increase in the population from 5,136 residents based on the 2010 census figures to 2018 census estimates of 5,370. Should mention that town census estimates or identifies a population of 5,600 residents. The disparity is largely due to the fact that the US Census counts students or children who are away at school living at their place of enrollment, whereas the town census counts them as part of living with their parents. And another thing is that the town census still includes people who might have moved away but have not notified the town about their relocation. So some are kept on the rolls for longer than they are living actually in town. Losing younger residents and gaining older ones. This is driven largely by the baby boomers. The population under 18 has declined just modestly. There have been greater decreases in younger adults. For example, those 25 to 34 made up 8.4% of all residents in 2000 and down to 2.5% in 2018, likely due to the cost of housing and probably the preferences of a lot of younger adults for living in different types of housing that might not be included in Manchester. Those 65 and older have increased from 16.4% in 2000 to 23% in 2018 and are projected to grow still more. Only less than 1% of the population identifies itself as being a part of a minority group. And very high median household income of $124,025, 8th highest in the state, higher than almost all of Manchester's neighbors, with the exception actually of Hamilton, which is 133,000 some odd change. But there's still some income disparities within the community. 12% of households are less than $25,000. The same point, 44% earn more than $150,000. This is based on the 2018 census figures. Poverty is low and is on the decline. 208 were identified as living below the poverty level in 2018, which is down from 301 in 2013. Some of the decrease could be that some of these folks are doing better. It's likely that some folks have had to move, relocate based on numbers of issues. potentially including housing costs. This chart just shows the changes in the age distribution that put together by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. These are their projections comparing the 2010 census figures to 2020 projections and 2030 projections. And most notably, you see those top three, the top three grouping of columns for the 65 plus, and you see that the 2030 bar is much higher than the 2010, and that's where so much of the town's population growth is coming from over the next decade or so. In regard to housing, there's been very limited housing growth. Between 2000 and 2018, there was actually a decrease of 1% in the number of housing units. When you look at the number of units that have been created between 2010 and 2018, there was a net increase of 56 units during that time. It's notable that when looking at the residential, the permitting for all new residential units, 45% involved the demo and replacement of typically smaller units by larger, more expensive ones. So 45% level of tear down activity. There's been some loss of rental units in the community. An example is 676 rental units in 1980, down to 633 by 2000, and down further to 542 by 2018. Some of this is that as units turn over, people who are the property might have been a rental, and people who bought it want to live in it and becomes owner occupied. I mean, that's an example. There have been some conversions to condominiums, two families to single families. There's been some of that going on in the community. I should mention about a third of the rental units are actually rentals of single family homes. Limited multifamily housing stock. 19% of the housing units were in structures of 3 or more units, which is lower in comparison to 32% level for both the county and the state. The median single family house price was $815,000 as of July, this past July. It was up, and was, that's up from $750,000 in 2014. To afford that $815,000 house price, one would have to earn approximately $170,000, assuming 80% financing, and being able to come up with that significant down payment and closing costs, as well as not spending more than 30% of income on housing costs. I checked today, and the median single family price has gone up to $870,000 as of October. So we're still seeing real significant surges in housing costs in Manchester. This go around, we looked at assessments. There were only 26 owner-occupied units that we estimated, that were actually assessed for less than $300,000 and would be relatively affordable. The 2018 census estimate include a median gross rent of $1,183. That median includes the subsidized rentals, which are about 23% of the town's rental housing stock. So that skews the rents down and makes the median more affordable than it really actually is if you're just looking at market values. And market rents are much higher. There aren't a lot of listings of them, but what is listed shows significant higher rents, and plus renters have to typically pay significant upfront costs to lease, including often first and last month's rent and the security deposit. And with rising housing costs, it's not surprising that there are wide and wider affordability gaps, which is defined typically as the gap between the median single-family house price and what a median income earning household can afford. Just looking at the $815,000 house price, the gap for a median income earning household, we estimate to be at about $229,500. You need to add that $55,000 if you're looking at more current single-family home prices. If you're looking at those earning at or below 80% of area median income, the gap increases significantly and well beyond the $400,000 level. And with widening affordability gaps, it's not surprising that there are substantial cost burdens. 28% of all households in Manchester are estimated to be spending more than that 30% affordability threshold on their housing, and 13% have what's called severe cost burdens because they're spending more than half their income on housing costs. If you isolate the 595 households that are estimated to be earning at or below 80% of area median income, the level of those with cost burdens increases to 59%, and those spending more than half their income on housing increases to 39%. So there are people in the town who are certainly struggling. And with COVID, these are numbers from 2018 typically. So when you add the impacts of COVID, we know that there's even a more pronounced problem with affordability. This chart just shows the distribution of assessed values in towns. Condos are a relatively small segment of the housing stock, only about 193 units, so that you can see it's pretty flat. But you see that below $400,000, there aren't a lot of units priced in that level. And then you see the big upsurge in units of over $900,000. The curve suggests that there may be even two housing markets in town. The norm, what would be considered more normal, and then this luxury market on the really high-end housing values. Next. So given what we did in the plan is we looked at the indicators of need and we kind of categorized them and suggest that rental housing is a top priority. And once again, I want to say that the master plan, we try to, we really are in sync with the findings of the master plan. Looking at rental housing is top priority, need for family housing and housing for seniors. Really looking at rental housing, you're much more able to get at those most vulnerable residents earning at very low income levels, given a mix of multiple funding programs, help to diversify the housing stock and make up for some of the loss in rentals that has happened over time. And almost all the state subsidies are targeted to rentals. And if you're doing 40Bs, all the units in a rental project count towards the SHI or housing production goals, as only the actual affordable units in homeownership developments. Nevertheless, the plan says that there is a need for first-time homeownership to help diversify an increasingly aging population, try to allow starter homes for younger families. And there are very few subsidized ownership units in the community. As I mentioned, there are 5 at Summer Street. And there's a recognition with with an aging population, that it's important to really kind of focus on ways to make units more accessible and in some cases provide some services as well. So let me just mention that this is a package of strategies that be broken into 3 different categories. The first is those strategies that can help build the town's capacity to better promote affordable housing. And one is to continue to conduct community outreach and education. And, you know, when we're doing these strategies, we do include an initial section on current status and try to bring the state up to date on what is being done. And certainly, the town can claim some real outreach through its master planning process. And I think the land management summit that was held in August is just terrific. And doing this intermittently makes a lot of sense to improve coordination and communication within the town and better inform residents. And we list some other things that the town has done and with respect to outreach to the community. And all these things should continue to be done. Another is to capitalize the Affordable Housing Trust. The plan 2015 plan included as a major recommendation to establish the trust, which was done shortly after in 2016. And the Housing Trust has really been mobilizing resources and energy to undertake a number of important initiatives that hopefully down the road will really result in some affordable units and better planning overall in line with community engagement. We indicate in the plan that the town has committed $150,000 to the Housing Trust to promote local development proposals as part of a notice of funding availability that's available on a rolling basis until committed. It also has received $167,000 in payments through its inclusionary zoning bylaw, and then some other donations. The plan suggests that at least 10% of the town's annual CPA allocation should go to the Housing Trust, with the opportunity for special projects to also be considered for CPA funding. And to continue to reach out for technical and financial resources. With this, the town has been really impressive in obtaining grant funding and other sources of funding to explore and to try to make progress on a number of programs. An example is the $100,000 local donation that was proposed and is being done to cover an emergency rental and mortgage assistance program for Manchester, operated by the nonprofit Action Incorporated. Another source of a resource was the $50,000 that has enabled the town and the Housing Authority to hire consultants to provide some options for improving and expanding very important Housing Authority properties. Another is some additional funding to help deal with feasibility studies of a Chapter 46 smart growth zoning overlay district for the limited commercial district north of 128. And Metropolitan Area Planning Council is doing this work and really could be an important zoning tool for the community. And there are other examples, $50K for the recodification and update of the zoning bylaw, a recent $100,000 grant from the state to help look at options for decommissioning the wastewater treatment facility so that that property can be available for some important waterfront redevelopment work. I mean, there are more, but these are some examples of important work that's in process, and that the town should continue to look at resources to move things along with its housing agenda. The next group of strategies involve zoning, and you kind of mentioned 40R, smart growth zoning overlay districts that's currently being studied for the limited commercial district. Another is to modify the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. The current bylaw makes it very difficult to create an ADU, and consequently none have really been produced. The town appointed an ADU study group that has prepared draft zoning for consideration and hopefully will be adopted at the next town meeting. Accessory dwelling units, for a number of reasons, can't really be included on the SHI unless you have to go through a whole rigmarole that doesn't really make sense. But they provide relatively affordable rental units in existing housing without a lot of negative impacts on the community, as well as some other benefits, certainly affordability. By creating an ADU, the owner benefits from rental income, and it makes it more affordable for them to remain in the unit. It's particularly important for seniors, and a more affordable rental unit is offered for tenants who are looking for smaller units. And modify multifamily requirements. And once again, a major recommendation of the master plan was to really promote greater housing diversity in line with design guidelines. And there are opportunities to enable a wider range of housing types to be built in the community to address a wider range of housing needs. And we provide some examples and suggest that the town really look at zoning changes to better allow these housing types to be built. And lastly, development strategies. These are the strategies where the numbers of new units will be produced. Pursue mixed use and transit-oriented development. We're talking here about the 40R and what might become of that as far as actual units in the location that makes more sense for more compact, mixed use, mixed income development. Besides the 40R tool, the friendly 40B process is also recommended, where the town and the developer agree on the basic project terms and conditions, and permit the project through the state's friendly 40B local initiative project. And I think you're going to be talking more about that, obviously, at the end after this discussion. Make suitable public property available for affordable housing. The town's studying this by looking into the expansion and improvement of the housing authority properties, looking into options for redeveloping the DPW site, and once again, opportunities for redeveloping the current site of the wastewater treatment facility. Some more small-scale infill development and conversions. Planners, we like to talk about this as the missing middle, where small-scale, mid-scale developments can fit well within existing single-family neighborhoods, to include starter homes, either like through Habitat for Humanity, or some housing trusts have actually acquired and improved and resold individual homes for affordable housing. And the conversion of some larger properties into smaller units, and the pocket neighborhoods, for example, where there are a small grouping of smaller cottage or bungalow housing around a green can be really helpful as filling needs for starter housing or for downsizing, for example. And ADUs can fit into this category too. So next slide. So next steps, we need approval from both the planning board and the Board of Selectmen in order to submit the plan to the state. The state technically has like 90 days to review and approve the plan. They've been really turning things around very quickly. So one would expect that they'd be able to pass the approval along within a month. So with that, I come to the end of the presentation, and we can open it up to questions and comments.
Okay, so as I said at the outset, this is going to be a little window for the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board to ask questions. The Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board are not going to be voting on this. We're just taking the presentation tonight. So with that, and reminding that we have roughly 135 people, many of whom are interested in asking questions about the 40B. I will open this up to the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen. So if you could speak up, I'll recognize you one at a time, and yeah, you can ask your questions, whatever questions you may have. Go for it.
Yes, Eli, I have a question for Karen.
Go ahead, John Rand.
Yes. Karen, very nice presentation. Took a lot of work. You and Sue have done an excellent job here, pretty comprehensive. I had one question. Early on, you had mentioned that going forward, there was a calculation that was made that we have to add 11 units to our inventory on a yearly basis. Did I understand that correctly?
Not have to.
No, but that is a suggested guideline. Okay, my question really is, what have we done in, say, the past 5 or 10 years in comparison to that? I'm just trying to figure out if this is a leap or we've been kind of working toward that area and it's not a real reach to get there. I'm curious.
In the last 5 years, there's in addition 5 SHI units. Before that, I think Summer Hill, and there were some other units. I think that this 5 years, though, particularly in the last several years, the town has really made an effort to try to implement the 2015 plan by getting into a position in order to actually produce housing. So I think the 40R work's very important. The housing authority units are very important. The potential 40B, DPW sites. So there are a number, as I mentioned in the beginning, irons in the fire, where I think the town's in a very good position to really make some headway now. So, I mean, I would be pretty optimistic about some of those at least being fruitful.
Okay, I know all of this is kind of getting us into a position for safe harbor, independent of how the 40B works out, but it's all moving in that direction. Okay.
Yeah.
Eli, I have a question, or a couple questions, if I may.
Go ahead, Becky.
Hi, Karen. Thank you
Hello.
very much. I have actually, just several questions. First of all, in the housing production plan, as well as in your presentation, something was referenced as TOD, and
Yeah.
that's under development strategies, where you say pursue mixed use and TOD. Can you tell me what TOD is?
Transit-oriented development.
Thank you. Okay. Just making a note. All right. And I have read that, just reminded me. Thank you. Okay. Then in
I
terms,
like those easy questions.
I'm happy to provide some. Not that unusual for me. Okay. And then regarding creating new subsidized housing for sale. When a person or when an individual or people purchase a home as a subsidized home, how is it that that home then gets resold? Is it always a subsidized housing unit? So the resale, in other words, someone cannot come in, purchase it subsidized, and then turn around and flip it.
That's a really good question. All of the units have deed riders, affordable housing restrictions that are executed and recorded. And those restrictions, and typically now, are in perpetuity. And as units turn over, they come with the affordable housing restriction. And any resales, the purchase prices and requirements are included. The formula for the purchase prices, the resale prices, and requirements are included in those affordable housing restrictions. It's really important that these restrictions and affordable units are monitored, and that any resales that come up, that all the requirements are carefully monitored, the units are affirmatively marketed, and that work is done with DHCD to ensure that continued affordability.
So who monitors that?
Well, typically developments have identified a monitoring agent. If that's not the case, then it'll be the state that'll be generally responsible. But I think, like, if I recall, Sue, you can maybe help me. I know that Harbor Light is a monitoring agent for some of the affordable units, but typically, every affordable housing unit has some identified monitoring agent.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to clarify, I will have more questions at some point, but you said at some point that with the housing production plan in place, that can help to give weight to a denial of a 40B. My understanding is that while we do not have a housing production plan that has been approved at this point, and we may have one within 2021, you cannot retroactively deny a 40B based on that. Is that correct? Once it's come before you, don't you have to have a denial based on a housing production plan within, I think it's 30, 40 days, something like that?
I mean, Sue, the housing production plan we did in like 2015 hasn't yet expired. There's this plan that's meant to, to replace the one in 2015 and allow for another 15 years. One has to actually, if you have an approved housing production plan in place, you have to actually produce units to get the certification in place in order to deny what is considered an inappropriate 40B development. So you first have to produce the units before you can get the certification or safe harbor to deny it. It's not just an approved plan, it's actual production.
Thank you for the clarification. I wanted to make sure that got cleared up. Thank you very much, Karen.
Welcome.
Other board members?
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
What happens if someone who is either a renter long-term or the owner of a an affordable unit becomes has a fortunate life event and becomes no longer eligible? So I buy a house when things are going really badly and it's mine, but you know, I discover a new skill and become much more affluent. Does the town or the state come after me and say, no, you got to move out?
There is no, for rental and ownership is different in this regard.
Mhm.
Ownership, there's no, once you buy the unit, there's no checking on income.
Okay,
What you check on to monitor is that the person is not, you know, renting it out or not using it as its primary dwelling unit, or you know, or make sure it's not flipping the unit without going through the regular, you know, required protocols. So you want to make sure that they're still their primary resident, and they haven't done anything that is against the affordable housing restriction. But for ownership, you don't check income. For rentals, the people are monitored every year for they look at the lease, they look at the income, and you have to earn more than 140% of the income limit in order to, you know, basically have to move out at some point to lose the affordable rent. So there's a lot of room for people to increase their incomes before they lose the affordable unit in a rental.
you mentioned that transit-oriented development. When you were talking, and I may just have confused two things. When you were talking about, I'm sorry, I hope somebody will pick that up. When you were talking about the 40R, what is the definition of a transit-oriented development? And in turn, does it need to be near a train? Does it need to be near a bus? Or is it just near a road?
Well, for 40R, does not have to be transit-oriented.
But
Our
particular
transit-oriented
40
development means typically that it's within a half mile, a quarter to half mile of public transit.
Okay, so our prospective 40R would not fit in the transit-oriented development, right?
I thought it was close. I thought it was.
That's correct. No, it is. That's correct, Ann. It does not fit in that category.
Okay.
It's close to a highway interchange, but not to public transit.
Those were my two questions for now.
All right, other board members.
I have a question. I have a question, Eileen.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And I want to thank you for a very thorough and rigorous presentation in terms of the document that we received. There's a lot there, and you distilled it very nicely. So thank you very much for that. In the information that I reviewed, I did not see that the housing production plan addressed the issue of dwelling units that are taken over by developers who then convert them into short-term rentals. And short-term rentals are not addressing, for sure, are not addressing the rental units that we need in the town. And I wonder if that's part of this plan that I didn't see, or whether that's something that can be addressed.
Well, it's not included in the plan. I mean, and it really didn't kind of get on the radar screen as far as a problem with respect to rental units. I'm not certain there's a strategy that relates to affordable housing, but if it's considered to be an important issue in the town, we might want to mention it as part of the housing needs assessment. We look at market conditions and make some reference to the fact that the town has some concerns about short-term rentals eroding year-round, the supply of year-round rentals. Does that make sense to you?
It does. In one neighborhood in town, 2 single-family homes were taken over and converted into multi-unit development, multi-unit facilities. And then those multi-unit facilities were put onto the short-term rental market. And that doesn't address the needs. It does move in that direction that you talked about in your report of taking single-family units and making multifamily dwellings out of them. But it did not address the critical need for multifamily rental units.
So you're talking about Airbnbs?
Yep.
Well, some towns are taking that up in zoning, but it doesn't, typically relate too much to affordable housing. But as far as, I'll work with Sue about coming up with some language to put in the housing needs assessment. We talk about market conditions.
Thank you.
Gary Gilbert.
Thank you, Eli. Thanks for your study and report. If we were to imagine briefly that we satisfied our affordable housing goals and that was over and done with, how do we get cheaper housing in town? How do we get cheaper than market rate apartments? How do we get cheaper than standard housing in town? Is the answer through modifying our zoning bylaws to make smaller units, and that by using the market, they'll de facto become less expensive, like mini houses, things like that?
Yeah, a lot of it relates to the cost of land, right? Fundamentally, land costs a lot in Manchester and it's getting more expensive. 2 ways to deal. Well, I guess there are 3 ways. Your suggestion of requiring smaller units. Another one is to allow greater density, so you can incorporate some economies of scale. And another is to offer subsidies.
Subsidies for something that's not classically an affordable housing unit? How?
Well, you can subsidize them and they can become part of the SHI. Right?
I'm sort of concerned about that small A affordable, that middle, people that just want a cheaper house instead of $850,000 to get one, and something.
Well, some towns, we mentioned these pocket neighborhoods where there's cottage housing or bungalow housing, where you can allow, usually you need some zoning in order to allow that because it's more than what's allowed in most of your single family zones. But a number of communities have, found that these are desirable and they can be less costly than typical single family unit. They're smaller, there's greater density. And in some cases, towns have actually subsidized them. So there are different income tiers. I give an example of a project in Edgartown where they had, it was condos where they had 80%, 100%, 120%, 140%. I mean, they did find that the ones that were most under demand were the ones that were in the lower income tiers. But, there are opportunities from some of these projects to include some market more affordable, as well as to potentially incorporate some affordable units, actual affordable.
Thank you.
Hey Gary, why do you feel we need more affordable housing?
Hold on. Other members of the planning board, can we have?
Sorry.
Should I respond, Eli?
No, you should not.
This is Chris Only. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Karen, I noticed in the report, in the plan, that there are some fields of data that have some discrepancies in them. And you do explain a little bit about those discrepancies, but I wonder, is that fairly typical for other housing production plans that you've done?
It is.
So there's nothing special here that we have to worry about.
You know, the most we can do is try to provide the comparisons and try to sort it out to what's really real. And, building permit data tends to be, for example, on, housing growth tends to be more valid, obviously. So we try to show the differences and then, come up with what makes most sense.
Okay, and my other question is, there seem to be two goals in the plan. One is to get to safe harbor, so we don't have to worry about 40Bs. And the other is this need for more affordable housing in general for diversity.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that even if we get to Fair Harbor, we're nowhere near satisfying the need?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been working with towns who are beyond the 10% and are still doing housing plans and still mobilizing resources to create affordable housing.
Okay, that's
Eli, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
I'm going to go through the remaining members of the planning board, and there are people a lot of people who want to talk about the 40Bs. So we're going to try.
Can I
and
just mention something based on Chris's comment? Once
Yep.
you get to safe harbor, or you meet the 10%, or you meet the housing production goals, you're in a much better position to negotiate for the projects you want and need. And I think that's an important thing. So you're still going to have a need, but you're going to be able to really provide some guidance on what gets created.
Eli, this is Becky.
Yes, Becky.
I have another question for Karen, if I may. This is, Karen, in the town of Manchester, we are quickly running out of developable property at this point, given the current zoning. But how do other towns reconcile what seems to be very development-driven housing production plans with not a lot of areas in which to do that? I'm curious.
The focus becomes more on redevelopment and, maximizing public benefits in addition to, guiding denser development in appropriate locations, looking at underutilized property. And this is the case in this production plan. We're looking at the wastewater treatment facility, looking at the DPW site, looking at the existing housing authority properties. I mean, I think this is, or, once again, looking at the, area north of 128 that doesn't really have much residential uses and redeveloping for kind of mixed uses. So that's what makes sense.
Right. So in other words, this housing production plan is not trying to gobble up more land, but to repurpose what we have.
That's the focus. I mean, there might be some parcels of land that, are available that can be appropriately developed, as I mentioned, as, a little pocket neighborhood.
Yes.
Or some additional infill housing opportunities, certainly.
Okay, thank you. And evidently I still have Thanksgiving on my mind with the term gobble. So there we go.
Oh,
Thank you.
gobble, gobble.
Yes.
Any other members of the planning board have questions?
Yeah, Karen, Ron Mastro Giacomo. The 2020 census data, do you plan to incorporate that into the production plan, or is it as is?
Yeah. And God knows when the 2020 census figures are going to be released. It's not going to be well into 2021, most likely. So we use the data that was most of, up to date and available. But we're talking about really getting this plan approved and into the state. So there's not a big gap between the 2015 plan and 2020 plan.
So the data that's in there is what we will be voting on.
Right. There is some 2020 information, like on market information and other things, but the census data, you know, the last available was the 2018 census estimates. The 2019 census estimates haven't even come out yet.
Okay, understood.
Other members of the planning board?
Hi, Eli, this is Christine. I guess I have a little bit of a follow-up on that, and this may seem confusing, but when I read through, there was several references to the Mapc projections. Could Karen, you expand on what those are based on? And then my second question is, my understanding of Manchester rentals is about 30%. Is there a calculation or a healthy number of Manchester residents or of Manchester rentals versus Manchester home ownership, which is healthy or sustainable? Where's the balance there?
First of all, I mean, the Mapc projections, there are two sets of projections that they've done. One is called the status quo, which involves the, continually, based on births, deaths, migration patterns, looking at the continuation of existing patterns. They have also projections that they call the stronger region scenario, which based on a number of additional assumptions that, for example, seniors will move out of their homes and there'll be opportunities for downsizing in rentals or condos, that millennials will choose to not choose to live in single family units, but will look at more multifamily options. And those tend to be, a little bit, the status quo are the conservative estimates, and the stronger region are a little bit more are greater. There is, I think I would confirm, yes, I think the percentage of rental units in Manchester currently is, I thought I had this memorized, but I don't. 26%, you're right. And I don't think there's any magic bullet about rentals. Got a lot of the rentals, as I said, a third of the rentals in Manchester are homes, though. So their rentals are range in size and price. So the diversity comes, I think, in providing more rentals that are smaller and less expensive. As for a portion of what makes sense, rentals versus ownership, I don't think there's a magic proportion to that, in my mind.
So I guess just to follow up on that, is that the Mapc data, is that regional or is that Manchester specific?
Manchester specific.
Okay, is that accessible somewhere that we can see?
It's in the plan. It's in the housing production plan. It's under, I refer to their projections in population growth, housing growth, household growth, and those areas all have references.
Okay, so my question is that a public information on the Mapc website somewhere, Manchester specific?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other members of the planning board? All right. So that's the presentation for the housing production plan. Subsequently, the planning board and the board of selectmen will meet separately to vote on approval of that plan. And we're going to move on to the next section of the meeting where members of the public are able to do ask questions and answer questions and get answers from mostly from town staff. And we have also John Whitten here tonight. John Whitten is with KP Law, who is the town's attorney of record, and he has done multiple 40B negotiations across the state and is an expert in the subject area. So he's available to answer questions as well. The way we're going to do this is people can raise their hands. You go to the participants tab and you click on raise hand, and I will take people in order, and I will ask you to unmute yourself, identify yourself, and ask your question, and then I will dispatch you to whoever's the best person, I think, to answer your question. I want to make sure that we keep this as a question and answer session. We're not getting too deep into just conversations back and forth, because we have a lot of people here and I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask whatever questions they have. So with that, I have Sandy first. So Sandy, if you could unmute yourself, identify yourself and where you live, and ask a question.
Great. This is Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. Thank you for the overview. I'm a bit confused as to what you're asking the planning board and the board of selectmen to actually vote on. What I heard today was a very high level view of some basics around different kinds of housing. So are you coming up with a plan of you want certain ratios of certain types of units to be built? Or are there actual plans? Because I've been listening in on a few of the meetings, not all meetings, of planning board and housing and everything. And there's talk of a bunch of like 30 units on Pleasant Street and building out a big building added to the Plains and adding a building to Newport Park. Like, are all of those plans being built into this plan that we're going to get a chance to review and weigh in on? Or is this just a 1 to 5 year plan of you want X amount of rental units and an X amount of transit units? Like, I just am a little confused because there wasn't a lot of detail that was given here regarding what the plan actually is.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sue Brown, you want to take that one for me?
Sure. So Sandy, the plan is quite extensive. So what you heard Karen provide was a real high-level overview. The plan is actually, the first half is an assessment of where we stand and what we need. And then the second part is recommendations of what we should do. There is a matrix or a chart, if you will, that projects how many units we might make and that we should look to create over the next 5 years. But it isn't that something that must be done. It's recognizing that if we take certain steps, these are the numbers that we could create over the life of the plan. So what the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board will be, when they adopt the plan, they're merely saying that we recognize and we accept that these are strong strategies to consider. There's nothing about the plan that demands or requires any action, but it's like a master plan. It's a guide for moving forward to create affordable housing, and that's what they'll be voting on. I hope that helps clarify.
So it's a goal, but there's no specific plans that are being approved based on what I'm hearing. And that when, say, someone wants to develop a new street somewhere, that there's going to be forethought as to, yes, we're going to let you build 4 large McMansions, or this is the time where we should be thinking about a planned community here. And it's going to guide the town in the future. I don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, but is that the concept?
I would say in essence, yes, it's a roadmap, and it doesn't approve or grant approval of any kind by the planning board or the Board of Selectmen for voting on it. They're not voting on any particular project. All of those have their own process. They're just approving it as a guide.
And this will not assume that there's a 40R, because that's a separate.
It does not. It mentions that as one of the strategies. It does not, there's no assumptions that anything that's being looked at now will or will not happen. But you will see it, you will see those in numbers to say, if you do go forward with a 40R, you might expect this many number of units. So.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take up too much time, but now I got distracted by another phone call, so sorry about that. I'll let it go to, there's a lot of other people that probably have questions. So if I come up with what I was going to ask, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Next up is Eileen O'Rourke. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's Eileen, actually. I have a comment and a point of clarification that I'm hoping you guys can answer. The comment is, I think the housing production plan is a good strategy to sort of figure out where it makes the most sense for the town to look at, where to put density, where housing makes most sense for multifamilies. And I would also point you guys to Beverly, because I feel like Beverly's doing a really good job with their plan and incorporating that into their master plan, and how they've identified density near the train station and how that makes a lot of sense. My point of clarification is, I've kind of seen some of the emails and websites about, kind of a counterpoint to the 40B development. And it's a bit confusing because it feels like once we have a 40B on our doorstep, what really can the town do if we don't meet the 10% threshold? It seems that our only strategy at this point is to work to either reduce the size or put some mitigation measures in. Can we, or actually also maybe point to another site that is more appropriate? I just would like to know what can the town do? It doesn't feel like we can actually reject it because we don't meet the 10% threshold.
John Whitten, this one's for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members of the board and the public. It's an excellent question, and it's one that's been discussed for 40 some odd years in the Commonwealth. And the straight answer is, of course, the town can deny a project, whether it's a comprehensive permit or a standard project pursuant to zoning. The problem with denying a comprehensive permit in general is the burden of proof on appeal to a very inhospitable entity on behalf of municipalities called the Housing Appeals Committee. The burden is entirely on the town to show that the project will imperil public health or cannot comply with state or federal law. So it's a very difficult burden for the municipality to shoulder. That doesn't mean you can't deny it. It just means that the town's ability to defend its decision is going to be difficult. But many communities have denied comprehensive permits. Very few of them have been successful, but some have. And I'd be happy to talk about those that have been successful. The general rule is to approve a comprehensive permit with conditions that the town, whether in this case, the Board of Selectmen and then the Board of Appeals, or just the Board of Appeals in the traditional sense, that the town feels it can support. So an applicant proposes X number of units. The Board of Appeals, in reliance on its experts and its own knowledge of the community, has the ability to condition approval, reduce the number of units, require offsets of impacts, or other ways to mitigate the impact of a project, just like it would in the normal course. So it's simply wrong for the development community to suggest you can't deny. That's just not true. What the standard of denial is, and the burden of denial is very high. But there might be a case where a municipality feels there's no way it can be conditioned, and therefore it denies. The track of litigation has been well established. Communities have been successful in denials, but as a general rule, to give advice to a community to deny a comprehensive permit is usually bad advice. So my advice to the cities and towns that I've represented all these years has generally been to try and approve the project with conditions that satisfy the town's concerns, whether it's density or environmental impact or traffic or whatever it may be. So the devil's in the details, but it would be incorrect to have the rumor spread, as it has in the Commonwealth, that you cannot deny a comprehensive permit, because in fact you can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's go on to Paul. If you could unmute yourself and identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Paul Miller. I live at 28 School Street. And I have a question about, based on the number of existing households in town, what's the maximum number of units the developer could build in Manchester under a conventional 40B?
To clarify, are you asking with respect to like the large project designation or?
Exactly, yeah.
I think I'll have Sue Brown do that one.
Sure. So the large project has a 6% cap. So I'm not sure which number, but it's somewhere between 136 to 143. The numbers that I had looked at and compared it. So it's somewhere in that range. So that just means that that's the large project cap. A town can decide to consider one more than that, but it requires the town's approval to do one larger than that. That is my understanding, unless Jonathan wants to correct.
Jonathan, do you want to?
No, I agree, Sue. I think that's absolutely correct. The board can always approve a greater project than the minimum. The board can approve a project even if the town is consistent with local needs. Many communities have. No, I agree with Sue's comments.
So could I just have a quick follow-up? I know there's probably a lot of people that have questions, but so let's say it's 136 is the maximum number allowed for a big 40B project. 6% of the households, as she said. Why does it make sense for the town to consider 157 units under any scenario? Why wouldn't we hold them to a lower standard and a lower number?
Actually, I think I'll take that one. So we have, at all of the workshop meetings we've been discussing so far, been discussing exactly that. One of the constraints that we expect to ask for is a more limited number of units, well under that large project threshold. The 157 number is really just the number that the developer came in with, and it's not a number that the town asked for, or it's just what was presented to us as an initial proposal.
I see. So I'm sure the developer he's very savvy. I mean, I've seen his resume, and in particular, one of the projects he did in Boston in the South End. They built a couple hundred units with very few parking spaces, as is the trend in downtown Boston if you're near some sort of a hub, some sort of a transportation hub. But he also called for a lot of those units not to have the ability to get south end parking stickers. And I'm wondering if that's something we could offset the impacts by having them not applied to beach stickers or not applied to something that, these developers are going to be making a fortune over the next 20 years on this project. And I think that the lasting impacts on our community we're going to be living with them for a long, long time. And I would bet that he doesn't own this property for more than 10 years or so. So those are just my comments. I think that we should be more diligent and more strenuous on the offsets of the impact and his community, mitigation of the impacts essentially. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Benjamin Oaks.
Hi, it's
Mm.
Ashley Oaks at 7 North Street. So following up on that line of conversation, don't you think that you're at a disadvantage were you to have a friendly 40B if you allow them to even propose the number of 157 as a starting point? Can't you push back and say, we'll start the conversation if you give us a number that's within the 6%?
So we actually, so I'm going to ask John Whitten to talk about this a little bit, but so I will say that we actually haven't yet had any negotiation sessions with the developer. We've had the initial presentation by the developer, and then subsequent to that, the Board of Selectmen has had a number of workshops and made some decisions about obtaining some research and some consultations so that we can develop an initial set of constraints or conditions and then go and have that first conversation with the developer. So we haven't actually had that conversation. The whole process starts out with the developer first coming to us and presenting their proposal to us, and then we start the negotiation. John Whitten, do you want to refine that at all?
No, I agree with that, Mr. Chairman. It is not uncommon. In fact, I would say it's quite typical that a developer applies for a project knowing that the municipality is going to negotiate a different number or offsite improvements or cash contributions. So it's a bargaining process, and I understand that the developer in this case may disagree that every developer files exactly what they want. That's never been my experience. So respectfully, I've yet to meet a developer who files for the number of units he or she or it feels the board is going to approve. That would be a very risky process for the developer if there's no margin for negotiation. And here, like most LIPs and most 40Bs, a developer proposes a number generally to get your attention and then negotiate with the community for hopefully an acceptable project. And that can be very successful. If the developer doesn't budge and refuses to negotiate on numbers or offsite improvements, then the town has its options as well. The threat of an unfriendly 40B, kind of the normative process, my opinion on that is not to consider it. Negotiate as best you can on the project that's before you in good faith. And if you can reach terms, then the Board of Selectmen can endorse the project, and then it goes to the Board of Appeals for some fine tuning. But I think you negotiate with what you have before you. If it's not acceptable, then the Board of Selectmen can take that position, and the applicant will be left with other options.
Okay, just following up on that, I just want to make sure that we don't start at a disadvantaged position where we're even engaging on a number that is not within the legal 6%. I would hope that we can ask for them to, in good faith, give us a proposal which is within the law before we even engage in the negotiation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that that's a fair point, and not my place to comment on that opinion, but it's a very fair point. I can only say this though, an applicant can apply for more units than the town needs to approve. So even though Manchester does benefit from the 6% calculation under the large project exception under the regs, an applicant can choose to apply for more. This applicant has, knowing full well that if the Board of Selectmen were to approve or endorse this application for more units than the town needs to approve, then the Board of Appeals could deny it, and the applicant would have no appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. So I'm reasonably confident that this applicant, or any applicant who applies for more than the town has to approve, has anticipated being negotiated with. Otherwise, the applicant is filing for a project that he or she or it knows the Board of Appeals can summarily reject. That wouldn't make much sense from a developer's perspective.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Daniel Moreland, I think.
Hi, yeah.
Well, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name is Daniel Moreland, 9 Bridge Street. We new residents, new homeowners. I just had a quick question. In regards to the public's involvement, this is all new to me, and I'm just this is my first meeting, honestly, ever attending. And the public's involvement in these decisions, so I understand that you guys are going to be voting just in general to move the plan forward, and that there's also this large project. So I just didn't know if you had like a rough timeline of how the public's voices can be heard, or how that process looks like going forward in regards to that large project and meeting those housing needs. Hopefully that makes some sense, but.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So I'll try and answer some of it. And again, I'll turn to John Whitten for some of it. The timeline is difficult to define because there's this kind of squishy period of negotiation with the developer. The developer wants it to happen immediately, and the town wants us, we want to take our time and develop as good a position as we can. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be having several more meetings with the Board of Selectmen and then with the developer, and all of those meetings are going to be open to the public, all of them. And you can provide us input at any time. You can either send us letters, you can be at those meetings and allow comments at those meetings. So there's plenty of opportunity for public to give their opinions and ask questions and make recommendations. So as far as the more detailed aspects of the timeline, John Whitten, do you want to lay it out a little bit for Mr. Moreland?
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Moreland. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generally speaking, the timeline works like this. The applicant gets the project eligibility letter, in the present case, either from the Board of Selectmen, which would then get finally approved by the state DHCD, or in the non-LIP process from the Commonwealth through either Mass Housing or Mass Housing Partnership. Once the applicant receives that project eligibility letter, in either way, they then have a ticket to the Board of Appeals. They cannot apply to the Board of Appeals without the ticket. Once they receive the ticket, they can apply to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals process used to be extremely lengthy and attenuated. The regulations changed several years ago to limit the time period that the Board of Appeals has to keep the public hearing process open. As a general rule, that is now 6 months. It can include extensions. So when we add up the dates, once the application is received by the Board of Appeals, it goes like this. The board will have 30 days to open the public hearing. They'll have 6 months to close the public hearing. So now we're in 7 months. They'll then have 40 days to render a decision. So now we're in 8 months and change. And then they'll have a very limited period of time to record that decision. So as a general rule, if the applicant were to file with the Board of Appeals on January 1st, without a series of extensions, the final decision would be filed with the town clerk by August or September. It's never that perfect, but that's generally the rule of thumb, 8 months to 9 months.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the only other question I had, and that's really helpful, thank you, is at any point, so is it the selectmen that vote, or do the actual residents ever, do we get a direct say, or is it by, electing sorry, this might be a very general question, but I think, at any point, does the town vote on what we want to do, or is this where the board, the selectmen vote themselves? I'm just trying to understand.
Well, it's an important question, Mr. Moreland. And so, without overstepping kind of my role in this, I can say generally, the Board of Selectmen will be taking a position on the local initiative project application. So the LIP approval, the LIP application. So the public is participating as we speak. If the Board of Selectmen vote to endorse the project, it will then go to the state. The state will generally approve the selectmen's endorsement. Then it goes to the Board of Appeals, and that is entirely a public hearing process. So the public's right to comment, to protest, to raise issues, to hire your own experts, your involvement is subject to the rules of the Board of Appeals, but it is an open public hearing process.
Okay, great.
There is no town meeting vote for a comprehensive permit in the normative sense.
Got it. Okay, I'll let other people ask questions. Thank you.
All right, Denny Hall.
Yeah, hold on.
Yep.
Denny Hall, 20 Masconomo Street, Manchester. Question for John Whitten. If, in accordance with the housing production plan, we were able to generate roughly 11 units per year to the subsidized housing inventory, would that allow the Board of Selectmen to not consider a 40B proposal?
No, being consistent with local needs, assuming 11 units is the correct number, and I have no reason to doubt that, but whatever that number is, no, the status of being consistent with local needs, 10%, having an approved housing production plan where you actually produce the units, doesn't mean categorically the application gets rejected. The Board of Selectmen could choose not to enter into a LIP because the town is consistent with local needs, but it doesn't have to. The Board of Appeals would not be obligated to deny a project even though the town has met its housing production goals. It wouldn't be obligated to, but it could. So there are plenty of communities, Amherst and Cambridge are two really good examples, where they've been well over their 10% target and they've approved many 40Bs in addition to the 10% that they already have, 10% status that they already have. So no, being consistent with local needs gives the Board of Appeals the ability to deny a project or condition it with, or approve it with conditions, and it strips the developer of an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. That's a very valuable status to have, but it's not automatic. In this case, the Board of Selectmen would have to vote, nope, we're not interested because we're consistent with local needs. And then in the other context, the Board of Appeals would have to do the same thing.
Thank you.
John Whitten, could you clarify? So the question was if we were meeting the threshold, I think, is this correct? Whether or not we are meeting the threshold of 11 units per year, in other words, a rate of production, would that be sufficient to allow us the safe harbor?
If that's, Mr. Chairman, I'm just not sure of the number, so that's my only hesitation. If that is the correct number and DHCD certifies that the town is in compliance with its housing production plan, then you would have the status of safe harbor. And just for folks that are interested kind of in the linguistics here, safe harbor is another way of meeting the statutory requirement of consistent with local needs. The two are synonyms. So if those number of units, Mr. Chairman, got Manchester to safe harbor or consistent with local needs, then the Board of Appeals could deny the project or approve it with conditions, and the applicant would not have an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee.
Eli,
Yes, Sue.
a point of clarification.
Yep, please.
It's my understand, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong. It's my understanding that safe harbor has to occur within the 12 months prior to the application.
If you're in planned production, Sue, that is correct. The other ways of achieving safe harbor, no. 1.5%, for example, land area, 10% in terms of number of units. But for planned production, yes, it is a period of time, 12 months, that if you fall out of that 12-month period, you got to do it again.
No, I guess my question is, you have to have safe harbor within the previous 12 months. You can't get it during the application, once the application has been filed.
Yeah, those are two different things. So let me just say, and that's an important question, Sue. The safe harbor has to be established before the application is filed with the Board of Appeals, not with the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Appeals. So that's the important milestone is, are we at safe harbor before an applicant filed with the town? If the answer is yes, then we go one direction. If the answer is no, we go a different direction.
I'm gonna move on then to Robert Neal. I guess Mr. Meal dropped off. All right. Mr. Meal, are you still there? Did you want to ask a question? You are still there.
You might direct him to unmute himself.
You unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah. How's that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I'll try and be very brief. First of all, thank you for all of your time and efforts this evening. This is an important and difficult issue in some senses. I have a couple of comments. I think you should stall as long as possible on any trigger actions that set dates by which the town must make a decision. In other words, let's buy some time to look at this and make some intelligent decisions. My second comment would be, I think we have a good chance that the state may deny an appeal because blasting Shingle Hill to pieces with all of the impacts on the environment, the state may not look favorably on. The environment is very important. All politicians recognize that. Those are my two comments. And perhaps a third, which is that these chat meetings are very good. They do not replace the need for clear information in the cricket and via emails to taxpayers, so the taxpayers can understand what they're voting on, what the impact of this project is on taxes, the environment, housing, and other things. And just doing it via these meetings, which take place at 6:30, people got kids to take care of, they get home late. You've got to get other information, unbiased information out there, clear, simple fashion, delineating the issues so the taxpayers can understand. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Meal, I'll make a comment on the last item first, and then I'll ask John Whitten to answer your or make a comment about your timeline question or comment. So on the information side of things, I've said that we're going to try and be putting together frequently asked questions and other information and posting it on the 40B website that we're maintaining for the town. We've been a little bit behind on that, but however, we did get a first round of that document put together. Board of Selectmen's about to get it. We just got it this afternoon. And so pretty shortly, we should start populating that site with more information. Also, we are in the process of hiring consultants in 3 or 4 different areas: traffic, environmental, fiscal impact. We're getting the developer to agree to give us a little bit of money up front to do those studies as quickly as we can over the next few weeks.
I wouldn't take that money.
What's that?
I wouldn't take that money. We'll finance it ourselves.
Well, that's up to us to decide. And anyway, the result of those studies will be posted for the public to view as well. And Mr. Whitten, if you could, I've heard this this narrative a few times about we should take our time to study some of these other options, as it were. And John Whitten, if you could comment a little bit about the fungible nature of time and the business of the town taking its time as far as opening negotiations with the developer in order to study other options. Can you describe some of the scenarios that happen if we were to take our time at different amounts of time in order to open negotiations with the developer?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, the risk of taking too much time is that the developer, in this case, who has proposed the local initiative project, decides he's going to go rogue in the file with the Commonwealth through the traditional process. In other words, I'm not going to go to the Board of Selectmen for a negotiated project. I'm just going to apply to the Board of Appeals. And when I say risk, I mean it removes the Board of Selectmen from the process. So the applicant then goes directly to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Selectmen's role in that process is limited, not non-existent, but limited. So I think the question really before the Board of Selectmen is this a project that the board can negotiate, work with, make it work for the town? If the answer is no, then the answer is no. And then the applicant will have another option. The applicant may or may not choose that other option. But I'd be the last person to ever recommend to a community to accept a project because it was fearful of something else that could happen. That's a tough way to run government. So, and I know the Board of Selectmen aren't thinking that way. So if the negotiations fall apart, then they'll fall apart despite the best efforts of the Board of Selectmen. So in terms of taking time, I think everything the board has done so far has been appropriate and perfectly appropriate. You've met with the applicant, you've opened this to the public. The Board of Selectmen are now seeking expert advice from relevant consultants that the chair just mentioned. And that will give the Board of Selectmen some more detail, which the applicant hasn't really provided, no fault of their own. The applicant is providing a very cursory application just to get your attention. Now the Board of Selectmen want to put some detail on that. And I think you work that out with your consultants and with the applicant. If any day the applicant says, I'm tired of waiting, then the applicant will walk away. And that's just sometimes what happens. But I would say everything the board has done to date is exactly the way to do it. Is you take your time, you act methodically, you act professionally as the board is, and you get the results from your consultants that you need. And it's up to the applicant to continually wait their turn because these things take time.
Exactly.
All right, other members of the public with questions for staff? Not seeing hands raised in the participants list.
You have two, Eli.
I'm so sorry. I was scrolled down. Silly me. Heather Lovett, you're
Yeah,
first.
there you go.
Hey there, I'm Heather Lovett, 23 Harbor Street. John Whitten mentioned that he'd be happy to talk about other towns that have successfully fought appeals. I'd love for you to do that for us, John.
Well, I can tell you of two denials, one where the town has or was upheld in the denial, and an ongoing hearing right now out of the town of Weston where I don't have the answer because we're litigating it literally as we speak. The fifth day of the hearing was today. The town of Middleborough denied a comprehensive permit at the rotary at Route 44 that many of you may be aware of, Route 44 and Route 28, right near the I-495 interchange. And the board denied it because it was not consistent with their master plan. And as a planner, and I know Sue will appreciate this, as a planner, it was music to my ears because we finally got the Housing Appeals Committee to respect the hard work of cities and towns to develop plans, especially plans for economic development. And this 40B in Middleborough was proposed within an industrial park which would have taken land intended for industrial development for housing. The board denied it, and Middleborough is a very blue collar community. There's a lot of, at that time, a lot of market rate housing and below market rate housing. Middleborough denied it, and we were successful at the Housing Appeals Committee. That is one of very few success stories. The other success stories on denials are pretty dramatic cases. One out of Hingham many years ago, where it was an old ammunition dump. One out of Hopedale, where the 40B was literally proposed at the end of an airport runway. I mean, really dramatic health and safety issues. The one in Weston, similarly dramatic, but we're in litigation now, so I don't have an answer. I will say that the denials where the municipality has been upheld, you can count on two hands. So that's how few there are. And the statute's been around for over 40 years, and a lot of comprehensive permit applications have been processed. And yet we can only find fewer than 10 denials where it was a true denial. And I'm saying that municipality wasn't consistent with local needs. So I go back to where I was a little while ago. I would not suggest that a denial of a comprehensive permit is the municipality's best option, just as a general principle. The devil's in the details. If this project or any project cannot be met or conditioned to meet what the town is looking for in terms of health and safety protection, environmental protection, or other relevant issues, then the town has the right, the Board of Appeals has the right to deny. But that, in my opinion, should not be the first way of approaching this. This statute's been around unchanged for 40 some odd years on purpose. It's a successful strategy to build more housing because it throws municipal zoning out the window. And the legislature has refused to change one word of the statute from its beginning. So that tells us something, that the Housing Appeals Committee is not in business to side with cities and towns. And we know that. And that's why there are so few denials that have been upheld. So as a general principle, the town is usually better served to try and work out something that is good for the town. And if it can't, then we'll go to the next phase. But step one should be to try. And that's exactly what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Shannon Erdman.
Hi, all. Thank you very much for this really comprehensive report. I have a very quick question, and it's tax-based, so about tax ramifications for this. As we all know, we are entirely and extremely dependent on residential taxes for all of our municipal needs. And I'm wondering how low-income 40R and or 40B helps to address this need.
Greg?
Sure. So we will be analyzing those kind of fiscal impacts and revenue generation, cost benefit through the use of a consultant to help us do that analysis. The developer has put forth numbers that are pretty rosy. Most residential development does not pay its way. That is typical. I would be surprised if this project was a moneymaker for the town. I would not expect that to happen. Can we mitigate and come up with measures to break even? I think that would be a wonderful outcome if we could pull that off. But typically, residential developments cost towns. They do not generate income for towns.
So quick follow-up to that. So if it's not a big moneymaker or moneymaker at all, then what's the incentive other than the state's going to make us do something, so we have to jump into bed with whoever comes and presents something to us that looks somewhat reasonable?
That's exactly the problem. If this project gets approved, even if we say no, under a typical scenario, as John just indicated, that's not always the case, but out of the vast majority of cases, that's what happens.
So the
Okay.
process that we're trying to go through right now is to see whether or not we can develop conditions that the developer will agree to that constrain the development so that it has less of an impact on the town. And if we're successful in that, well, then we've mitigated the impact of the project. And if not, then as John Wooden said, you know, we go to the next steps and we may get something that's a higher impact project.
Eli, this is Sue. May I
Yeah.
address the 40R piece of that? Shannon, one of the principles of the 40R is that it will be a revenue generator. So that is, we're looking at a mix of uses there. And frankly, if in our feasibility study it didn't show to be revenue positive, then I wouldn't even recommend that it be voted on. So there's a difference between those two. I just wanted to make that clarification. The 40R, the intent very much is to create revenue and at the same time allow for and diversify our housing stock, but we would expect it to be revenue positive. Thanks.
Okay, thank you all.
Matt Gibbs.
Hi, good evening. Matt Gibbs, 1 Sawmill Circle. Just curious if the board can comment on what offsite mitigation initiatives they're considering to negotiate with the developer. You know, school street improvements, senior center, you know, I'm sorry if that's been discussed already in other working groups, but I think those in the call would benefit hearing what you may be considering.
No, that's okay. So we've gone over a list of a bunch of different items. We've broken them into categories related to, you know, fiscal management, fiscal impact, traffic mitigation, environmental mitigation. We've discussed things such as constraints with respect to net pollution at the boundaries of the project, constraints on the size of the development, or so height of the structure, number of units, some potential for a bunch of the land being put under conservation the developer is not going to be building on. Some contribution from the developer to fire salaries or fire equipment, contribution from the developer to transportation. So for example, to run a shuttle to limit the impact to downtown traffic and parking. Well, let's see, what else? Greg, you got any more to add to that?
Well, I think, you know, starting off with size, that's certainly a critical one. It was just how big of the project we ultimately could accept. Certainly environmental impacts you mentioned, but so putting into place pretty high performance standards so that there are no net impacts off-site, water, stormwater, nutrient loading, et cetera.
But aren't those things all, it's my understanding of 40Bs that they don't necessarily bypass, you know, environmental approvals, right? So aren't there still at the state level environmental reviews that would take those things into consideration? I just worry that using that as a bargaining chip is going to, you know, it's a chip potentially that doesn't have high value if those, at the state level, they still need to go through those environmental reviews.
Right. John Whitten.
So I would caution the town in terms of any expectations that the state is going to protect the town of Manchester. It's not. We have too much history, especially in 40B projects. So the Board of Appeals cannot waive Title V, so traditional septic systems. The Board of Appeals cannot waive the state building code, and the Board of Appeals cannot waive the Wetlands Protection Act. Everything that is local, the local wetlands bylaw, the subdivision regulations and zoning, for example, can be waived by the Board of Appeals, and if not by the Board of Appeals, then by the Housing Appeals Committee. So while the state does have jurisdiction over the macro issues, I would caution the Board of Selectmen not to assume that the state has the town's back. And respectfully, it's just the opposite. The fact that Manchester is not consistent with local needs has demonstrated across the Commonwealth that the Commonwealth does not have your back, because one of the key priorities for this administration and the past several administrations is build more housing. So I would be careful. I think if the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Appeals can negotiate for environmental issues, open space, surface water, groundwater protection, those are things to grab, because you should not, again, respectfully, in my opinion, you should not presume that DEP is going to protect the town's interest. And that's not a knock against DEP. That's a knock against projects that come in under 40B that seem to have priority in the state's permitting system, whether it's MEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, or DEP when it comes to stormwater runoff, wetlands protection, or wastewater disposal. So I again, just a caution without intentionally trying to insult the Commonwealth. That's not my intent at all. It's just the facts over the past 40 years.
That's a great clarification. Thank you.
Mike Cavallo.
Thank you. Mike Carvalho, 2 Jersey Lane. Appreciate the opportunity to listen to these very informed presentations. And I think this is a Karen question. Karen, I understood that the median gross rent in Manchester by the Sea, I think it was for 2018, was $1,183, and that the market rents were actually quite higher. Is that correct?
Eli, Karen is not still here, but I'm happy to answer that question.
Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome. So those are the figures, and the reason that she gave, the reason why the median rent is so low is that most or a large number of the rents in Manchester are the deeply subsidized units at the Manchester Housing Authority. So that naturally skewed those rent figures to be very low. But
Okay.
actual, I think she has in the report the actual rents if you discard those.
Okay, and so the SLV proposed development, the rents would be north of $1,800 per month for a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yes, and that is the allowed amount under affordable housing under the regulations.
So a firefighter, a teacher in Manchester X Elementary School, they're going to be able to afford $1,800 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment?
That is what the 80% AMI is supposed to be able to afford by paying only 30% of their income to rent and housing costs. So
it doesn't seem particularly affordable. as we're doing this exercise.
I don't disagree.
But at the end of the day, the rents that are being set aside for this affordable housing and the loophole that we've heard about that assists the developer, at the end of the day, we're not making any more affordable homes, right? Housing?
You're not making deeply subsidized homes. They're affordable to folks at 80% area median income. So a family of 3, $86,000 a year.
Okay, 3-bedroom apartment.
I'd like to make a comment here. One thing, an observation I will make is that we've had a couple of letters, including from the Manchester Affordable Housing Trust, made a recommendation that the town actually ask in its negotiations with the developer for a lower AMI amount. So I think MAHT had a letter requested something along the lines of a 60% AMI.
Thank you.
More compatible with what you're talking about. And that's a condition that we actually could attempt to negotiate with the developer. I don't know whether or not we'd be successful, but it is a condition that we could ask them for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Sheila Hill is next.
Thank you, Eli. This is a ballpark question, probably for Sue. What is the amount, the dollar amount of commercial development that would need to take place in the LCD to generate sustainable revenues for the town? Do we need $1 million worth of development in the LCD? We only get 10%, 11% of that in tax rebate. Do we need $100 million of development in the LCD to really sustain the town in terms of the master plan numbers of, we need $85 million over the next 10 years. So what amount of development do you think needs to take place?
Boy, you're throwing me a hardball, Sheila. We've looked at,
we need to reverse engineer the numbers, sort of.
Yeah, we've looked at a couple of scenarios. I think I'm really not comfortable putting a figure on what we need in terms of I think you're maybe asking what do we need for revenue generation rather than the amount of the price of development. So I will just go by that. And I think that I would say that in the master plan, we looked at upwards of, a couple $1 million of revenue would be a reasonable amount to assume or to aspire to for development in the LCD. And Greg, if you want
I'll
to
jump in. Sure, I'll jump in a little
go
bit.
ahead.
So our annual budget struggles, but if you had an extra $1 million a year in tax revenue, that would be a significant boost and a bit of a game changer in relieving some of the pressures that we have. So to get $1 million more in revenue, you need, a little north, just around 100 million of new construction. So what does $100 million worth of new construction look like? Commercial construction, an expanded Mac with a hotel next to it and medical offices, which is something that they have talked about, and maybe a senior care community that would get you well north of $100 million worth of new construction. So $2 million worth of new revenue would even be better. So, where do we, where's the trade-off? And I think as we get a little further along with the sort of analysis of what kind of density could be built in the LCD while still maintaining strict environmental standards and performance needs, I think we'll have a better answer to that. But I think it's safe to assume that $100 million worth of new development in that general area is feasible.
And I think even though $1 million a year doesn't get us very quickly to 85 million in 10 years. I mean, if in fact that's the number we need to be sustainably, fiscally sustainable.
So if you had $1 million, if you had $1 million a year extra that you could put into bonding, that would get you well on your way to overcoming a lot of the capital infrastructure needs that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Other members of the public, I don't actually have anybody with their hands raised right now. Okay, well, if we don't have anybody else who wants to ask a question, I think I will thank everybody for their time, and we will try to do more meetings along these lines where we're just answering public questions. Any closing comments from any of the staff tonight?
Just Eli, so next week, there will not be a 40B meeting. We have a budget meeting on Monday and a budget meeting on Wednesday. Town budget on Monday and a school budget hearing on Wednesday of next week. And so we will take a break next week on a 40B. Tentatively, we have scheduled the 17th of December for the next 40B workshop. And we may have some early comments and feedback from the consultants, their peer review consultants, though we certainly won't have their completed analysis by then.
Okay. All right. So we, planning board, do you want to adjourn your meeting if you're still here? Hope you are.
Yes, planning board moves to adjourn. We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Coons,
Yes.
Mr. Licio,
Yes.
Ms. Foley,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes, Ron.
and Mr. Olney.
Yes.
And the chair votes to adjourn. We adjourned.
All right, thank you. And I'll take a motion to adjourn the Board of Selectmen meeting.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
All right, in discussion, roll call vote, Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bob Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Bolton votes yes. Again, thank you everybody for coming this evening. I really appreciate the time you've taken with us and hope we can continue to answer your questions. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Eli.
Good night.
Good night.